Happy coding.
Hey there, and welcome to our next video in our series of Intro to Web Development. We have learned quite a bit. We've learned all about HTML and CSS and writing your own JavaScript. And in this video, we're going to expand on all of that, and we're going to learn about JavaScript libraries, which lets you use JavaScript that was basically written by other people so that you don't have to write it yourself. So just to get started, I'm going to jump straight into our editor here. So I'm just using the glitch editor, just like we've been using the entire time. I haven't done a single thing yet, other than create like a remix of our starter project. So just to get something working, I'm going to maybe add a script.js file first. And so hopefully this is pretty much review. So I'm going to add script.js. And I'll come back to that in a second, but now it exists. I'll make this a little bigger. And I'll load that file. Here in head, script source equals script.js. And then close it out. And then maybe I'll have, I don't know, a button, maybe, button, click me. And just to get something started, I'll have like a UL with some LIs in here. LI, ID equals, 1, 2, 3 maybe is what I'll do. So right now I'm just writing some HTML, and I am going to hook this up to my JavaScript in a second. And this is really just to have a playground to start messing around in. All right. Whoops, I can't talk and type at the same time. So I've got my UL. Right now my button doesn't actually do anything, so I'll add an onClick attribute down here. OnClick equals, doesn't really matter, clicked. And then I have to define that function over in my script.js, so function clicked. And just to test this out, I'll just use the alert function for now. Hello. So I'm hooking up my JavaScript to my HTML, and I'm testing out that it works. And of course it does not. And that's because I spelled clicked wrong. Oops, clicked. So if I click that, now it does indeed work. I've got my not so beautiful alert box here. But what that means is that my HTML is hooked up to my JavaScript, so that is good. Okay, so next I want to, through way of example, sort of talk through like why we are excited about JavaScript libraries. So let's say I wanted to replace this text when I click this button. The three LIs here. I wanted to say lions, tigers, and bears, something like that. Well, we know how to do that by now. We can call the document.getElementById function, and we can get the IDs 1, 2, 3. I made it easy for myself. And then we can call inner text on each of those. So I'll type that out. So I'll say like let, I don't know, li1 equals document.getElementById1. And then I can say li1.innerText equals lions. And I'll test that this works. So I expect it to see, expect this to change the lines in a second, and it does. So I can kind of steal that code. So let li2 equals document.getElementById2. And by now you've probably written code that looks pretty similar to this, where you're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And it's kind of tedious, kind of annoying. So lions, I want that to be tigers, I guess. So click me, lions and tigers, and finally one more. And at this point you might start copy pasting, which always leads to like, spelling something wrong or changing it in one place but not the other, but that's okay. We'll just do it. 3, and then this one should be bears. So li3, 3, okay. And so indeed I've got lions, tigers, and bears over here. Oh my. And this is okay. And like I said, you have probably written code that looks a lot like this, or the process for it was probably pretty similar. And I touched on this briefly way back at the beginning, and especially when we first started learning about JavaScript. But we didn't really spend a lot of time there because it doesn't really give you any like new abilities other than making your code a little easier. And that is the idea of creating your own functions. So I created this clicked function. I can create another function, like a function, let's say like set text maybe. And in this case, I actually want it to take some variables or some arguments. So I want an ID and I want some text. And in here, I'm going to say like, let, I don't know, element equals document.get element by ID. And the ID I want to use is this ID. Oh, it's covered. My dumb head's covering it. This ID here. And then I can say element dot inner text equals text. And now the power of this is now that I have this set text function, which does the stuff that I want it to do, or the stuff that I want to do up here, I can simplify my code up here. So then instead of having all of this code, I can just call my set text function a bunch of times. So I can say set text 1, and what did I say? Lions, set text 2, and what did I want? Tigers, and set text 3, and let's be fun. Let's say lizards instead. And this will work because when I call the clicked function, when I click my button, my code is going to then call the set text function, which is defined here. And the set text function takes an ID and some text and gets the element with that ID and then sets the inner text of that element to the text that I'm giving it. And so I can save myself, in this case, I'm just saving myself 2 lines of code at a time. But you can imagine that, let's say I was doing even more stuff for every element. Maybe I'm like, setting the styles of it through JavaScript, or maybe I am not just creating one LI, maybe I'm creating like a whole div in JavaScript. And you can see that that would quickly get more and more complicated, but my code up here can stay simple because I can say, hey, just do that thing that you do with these parameters. And then I don't really need to care what the actual implementation details are of that function. But anyway, let's see if this actually works. So if I say click me, indeed, I've got lions, tigers, and lizards now. And this is a step in the right direction, I think. This helps you organize your code. And, we could probably spend more time on just creating functions and organizing your code. And that is a really important concept in computer science. But the reason I wanted to show it here is to help explain how libraries work. So, let's say that, I don't know, let's say I wanted to have, let's assume that this code gets a little more involved, so it's a little more interesting. So you can think that this might be 100 lines of code or even 1,000 lines of code. And right now I have it working in my project, but I can further organize it. So I can go one step further and I can pull this out into its own file. So let me maybe create a new file. Let me call this, I don't know, text-tools.js. I want to add that as a file. And this is just a JavaScript file. It's similar to script.js. You can call any of your JavaScript files anything you want. Script.js is what usually the main file is called, but you call it anything. You call it unicorn.js. You could call it javascript.js. You can call it, my favorite JavaScript file ever.js. It doesn't really matter as long as you use it in your HTML. But in this case, I'll just call it texttools.js. And then what I will do is I'll move this function out of my script.js and into texttools.js. And all I did was move the function. And again, we're imagining that this function is a little more interesting and might have, hundreds of lines of code and could contain many functions that call each other. It could get really involved. And right now my script.js file is complaining. I actually don't know if that's going to be fixed in a second or not. But the thing I need to do next is to load my new JavaScript file. So I'm currently loading script.js. So I also need to load my new JavaScript file exactly the same way I did the other one. So source equals text-tools.js and then close it out. So now my index.html is saying, first off, start reading the HTML, read the title, load the CSS, and then load this file, load texttools.js. So it goes to texttools.js, loads this file, and it says, okay, well, now I know that there's a function named setText. It doesn't actually run it yet because nothing has called it, but it just remembers it. It says, okay, cool. I know that there's a function called setText, and it takes an ID and text, and then it like stores what it will do, but doesn't actually run it yet. And then back in my index.html file, then it loads script.js, and script.js defines a clicked function, and it does the same thing where it says, okay, now there's a function called clicked. I'm also going to remember that. I'm getting a little annoyed because it's saying setText is not defined, which is not true. It's defined in the other file, but I guess Glitch is not smart enough to see that connection. But anyway, then the rest of the index.html file is loaded. But if I run this, if I click this, then what I'll see is that it still works. Even though Glitch is complaining, which it shouldn't be complaining about, but it works because my browser has loaded both files. It loaded texttools.js and it loaded script.js as well. And this can help you further split up your code. You can put, some of your more like utilitarian functions in one file and say that's where that goes. And then you can put your like main logic in another file that, that's pretty common. But the thing I want to show you is when I'm loading this, right now I'm just using this file name, which is like corresponds pretty directly to this file name over here. But this is a URL. In this case, I can get away with just using the name because this is what's called a relative URL. This is next to the index.html page. So because the file is like next to it in the directory, you can use just the file name. It'll just say, hey, is there a file near me that is named this? But you can also use the full URL. And to get that, what do I want to do? I want to open up my preview in a new window just to be able to copy paste the URL. So this is just the same page loaded in its own tab. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal this URL. This is the like top level URL for my entire page. And so /index.html is what we're actually looking at right now. That's just sort of assumed. That's why it's called index. But anyway, I'm going to steal this top level URL. And then we're going to go back to my code. And when I load my source here, I'm going to load this as what would be called an absolute URL or full URL. So I'm going to just paste it in. And now my source that I'm loading my JavaScript file from, my texttools.js file, is this whole URL. And this whole URL is just a file. Let's see what happens if I go directly to it in my browser. I think this will work. Yeah, here it is. Here's the source of it. If I go directly to that file in my browser, here's the JavaScript that I wrote. And so when my page loads it, it says, hey, load this URL, which is not any different than when I was loading it from that single file. But it still works. If I say click me, there it goes. It still works. And now I could do something like use this URL in other projects. If I didn't feel like copying over that same code into every single one of my projects, I could say, oh wait, I created some utilitarian functions in my previous project, so let me just load that directly, and that would work. I could just take this and load it in another project, and it would be fine because this can be anything. This can be any URL. As long as it points to a JavaScript file. And that is a JavaScript library, what we just did. So this is my texttools.js file is a JavaScript library. It's a pretty small JavaScript library, but a JavaScript library is some JavaScript code that usually somebody else wrote. In this case, we wrote it here, but usually what you'll be doing is looking for a library that somebody else wrote. And that is a really powerful concept in computer science because it means that you can now collaborate with other people and you can find things that are like open source libraries that do things that you could do yourself but would take you a long time to do, or maybe you just don't feel like doing them. And there are many, 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 many JavaScript libraries out there. So I'm just going to use one as an example. So let's see, what do I want to do? I want to, maybe I'll just add one little line of code to my script.js. And this is a little annoying that Glitch is not smart enough to see when functions are coming from libraries, but that's okay. We can't have everything we want. But I'm just going to add an alert here. Hello world. So now when I click, I should see an alert. And indeed, I do. Hello world. And this is okay. This is the built-in alert function from JavaScript. But let's say that I wanted to write a new function that showed a better alert, showed something that was like prettier or more customizable. Maybe I could like set the background color or the font. How would I do that? Well, we could do that. We could do everything that we have done so far in this class and, find the JavaScript functions that would let you do that. Maybe write some CSS, maybe some HTML, maybe show something in the page itself. We could do that. But probably someone else did it for us. So why not use that? And so what I'm looking for is a JavaScript library that has like customizing behaviors for the alert box. And so I don't know, it's not like rocket science, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a search engine and I'm going to type in, I don't even know, like JavaScript alert library maybe. And yeah, there's a bunch of them. And you can click through and read about each one and, try each one out and see which one you like the best. I will say that, spoiler alert, we're going to use this one because I did that beforehand and found one that I kind of like. But there are a bunch, and many more. And so let's see. So once I pick one, I'm just going to go to one. Maybe I should go to the home page instead. Yeah, there we go. And this is kind of hard to read because they love this like light on light thing, but whatever. And here's an example, like here's a normal alert. Okay, let's preview that. Yep, that's what we're used to seeing. And here's the new function that it might give us. And let me preview that. And ooh, that's a little nicer, right? That's a little more animated, a little cooler looking. It's in the page itself. So I don't know, let's see if I click get started. And what I'm looking for with the way that we are setting up our project is something like a URL that points to a JavaScript file. And here it is. So if I load this whole thing into my page, let me just do that. Let me copy that into my HTML. So if I go back here into my index.html, I'm going to load it, I guess, here. And the order is important, I should mention. So I'm going to load it first. But now I have this line of code, which is in my index.html file, and it's loading a JavaScript file, just like I was loading my own JavaScript file. I can even go to this in my browser. I will say that, spoiler alert, whenever you see a .min in a name, chances are that the code is going to be really, really ugly because they process it to do a few things. Like this is really gross code. Like this is not human readable because what they do is they remove all of the extra white space. So any new lines, any tabs, any spaces, and then they basically rename every variable and every function to be a single letter. And the reason they do that is in theory to make it faster to download. So that's what the min is for. It's minified. This also, in theory, can make it harder for like hackers to steal the code, but that's usually not really a real concern, especially for this because it's open source. So if you wanted to read the source, you could go through their GitHub and read all about it. And they set their code up a little different than what we have been doing. But, if you click through, and I don't even know where to choose, but, it is JavaScript. Well, technically it's TypeScript, but this is very similar to code that we have already written. Like, here you go. Here's an if statement that's doing stuff like creating variables and using DOM manipulation here to change the class of an element in the page. Maybe I should have thought of a better example before I got here, but yeah, like here's things like a for loop, which we've also seen. Here's another if statement, and all kinds of stuff that we could theoretically do ourselves, but why do it if you don't have to? Okay, so that's like sort of taking a peek at the source code of the library, but the beauty is that we don't really care. We don't really need to know because we've loaded the file in our HTML, and now we can use it. We can use the functions that the library gives us. So if I sort of just copy this in fact, it's just SWAL. I guess that stands for Sweet Alert, the name of the library. So let me go change that in my JavaScript. So I'm just going to change this to SWAL, and I'm guessing that Glitch is going to complain. Yeah, that's pretty annoying. I don't know if there's like a setting that you can change in Glitch, but for now I'll just try to ignore it. But let's see if this worked. So I'm going to make this a little bigger, and I'm going to say click me. And yeah, it did. It's right above me. And the power of this is I just added 2 lines of code to my project. I added the line of code that loads the library in the first place, this line of code, and then I used the library in this line of code. And so from here, it's a matter of learning more about the library. So what else can the library do? We just use like the most basic example, but maybe there are others. This is the idea of documentation, where I have found a JavaScript library. And so what I need to do is read through the documentation to understand how I use it. So I got started just by honestly copy pasting it, but really the first thing you should do is read through the documentation, get a sense of how it works, and then try stuff out. So here's another example where it looks like the title and the text are split up. That's kind of cool. You can also add icons. So that's nice. Good job. So I could have warning or error or info. So sure, I can play around with that. So let's say like, what did it say? So title and then text and then an icon. So the title, let's say like congrats. And then the text will be like, you used a JavaScript library. And then for the icon, what does it want? And what I'm doing is I'm going back and forth between my code and the documentation for the library, and I'm like just checking like what else can I do. And let's say, I don't know, let's say success here. That sounds happy. And let's see if that changes anything. So now if I click the button, it does. Yay! Oh, I'm still in the way, but it's there. Now I've got my icon, I've got my title, and I've got my text here, and again, I didn't really have to do much because I am relying on the power of this JavaScript library. So from here, I could keep reading through the documentation. This is like using objects, which we also learned about, where you can specify even more parameters. So you can specify the button text. You can do all kinds of stuff. And that is that's the core of using a JavaScript library, is looking at its documentation. Well, first of all, finding it by Googling it or using whatever search engine to find the library in the first place. And chances are usually you'll try a couple of different ones out and compare and contrast and be like, well, this one gives me these functions, this one gives me those functions, and which one gets you closer to your goals. And then reading through documentation to figure out like, okay, exactly what can I do in this, and then trying it out. And that might feel like a lot, but the power is in this single line of code, I have a ton of functionality that I just got without needing to worry too much about all of the details myself. Okay, so from here, that's the core of loading a JavaScript library. So I'll go back to that line of code in my index.html, and once you find a JavaScript library, find the URL for it. Another alternative is you can often download it and then upload it as a JavaScript file to your project, and then look through the documentation, read through it, try stuff out, and get closer to your goal. So from there are many libraries. I used one called Sweet Alert, which is, I like it as an example because it's relatively small in that I can start with alert and then go to a different function. But there are many, 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 many libraries out there. So if you're looking to do something, try typing JavaScript library and then fill in the blank, whatever you're trying to do. Chances are there's something that does it for you. So I'm going to stop this video there, and in the next video, I'm going to talk about my favorite JavaScript library that lets you make sort of visualizations and like artistic like sketches, and it's just a lot of fun. It's called p5.js, but I'm going to leave that for another video. And for now, thanks for watching. Go find cool JavaScript libraries. Let me know what they are, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, happy coding.